Trump leading with about 55% of the votes that have been counted so far. Kamala Harris with 44% of the vote. Georgia had promised that by about 8 o'clock Eastern time, they would have their early vote numbers tabulated.
They were very adamant about that.
So, and they were trying to, because 2020 was so slow, they were trying a system where they would get those early votes counted quickly, because about 70% of the anticipated voter turnout does vote early. So that is a huge number. So we're waiting to get more information out of Georgia. That might be the first swing state to
Probably the most closely watched swing state is the one in Georgia. We'll get to that in just a minute, as well as those results start to come in. Minnesota State House also is one we'll watch tonight. In fact, we're going to watch Minnesota's House all night long. It's the one that could swing the balance of power in Minnesota, which is now held by Democrats. It could flop. And we have one Senate seat in Minnesota as well to watch tonight.
And the House, all 134 seats are up for election this cycle. So, and there are about a dozen that are very, very close. Let's look at Michigan now. And Michigan was a state that changed the rules after 2020 being so slow. Michigan is traditionally a swing state, and they wanted to get those early votes counted before Election Day, or at least started before Election Day. Right now, we don't know how many votes precincts have been counted, but it says 1% of the vote, and so Kamala Harris leading with 56% of the vote. And again, that's an extremely small number of the total population that is voting in Michigan. And we'll continue to watch.
Can we take up Florida right now? President Trump has been declared the winner. 92% of the votes estimated to have been counted now, 56 to 43%, a 13% margin for him. That's 30 electoral votes. That is what has put Donald Trump above Kamala Harris by a 30-point margin right now, almost 40-point margin right now in those electoral votes.
All right, straight ahead, we are taking a look at generational politics, how different age groups play a role in elections.
That's next, right here at 7. Again.
More numbers, more states being called, but it's still going to be a long night, maybe a long week, in fact. We don't know yet. Some of the swing states could be a little slow.
All right, this is the Electoral College map. Keep in mind, 270 to make it to the presidency, and right now Donald Trump leading Kamala Harris 111 to 72. Again, though, we're still waiting on some of those key swing states, which will start to tip this race in one direction or the other, and that's what we'll watch very, very closely. We're providing you with insight in tonight's election all night long as well, which becomes very important as the night drags on.
And we have Fox 9's Tim Blotz joining us with Hamline University political science professor David Schultz, and we are still learning how the country is voting in this presidential race. One of the factors likely playing a big role is how emerging generations vote. So explain that.
Yeah, in the past 10 years, we've seen some major shifts now in voting along, well, dividing along age lines, right? And David, you've done so much research on this, and it really comes down to generational politics here. Explain this to us in the bell curves.
It does. Okay, let's take us back to roughly the mid-1970s, 50 years ago. If we looked at American public opinion, it flowed along a bell curve. And what we could say is that half the voters in America would identify as being on this side, half on that side, but the vast majority of public opinion was in the center. The center of the Democratic Party here, center of the Republican Party here, broad consensus on a lot of issues. But what we're seeing over a 50-year period is a shift to where now American public opinion, the center has somewhat collapsed. People have shifted further to the left, further to the right. The two parties have separated themselves out. And one of the drivers, main drivers of this, is a generational shift going on in American politics at this point.
Great. Let's look at this shift, because we largely have the greatest generation, right? Those born right around the turn of the last century,
Correct.
1900, they're largely out of the picture now.
That's right. And as the silent generation's exiting, what we know now, some people want to say as become older, become more conservative. Actually, what happens was when we're adolescents in our formative years, as a generation, there are events that form kind of a collective political identity and define who we are. And so we can look across all these different generations and find particular types of characteristics that influence politics.
Sure.
And for our purposes, what I want to look at is something like this, going all the way down here, going from the greatest generation down to Gen Z. We're going from a generation here that was more white, more Christian, to a generations now, by the time we get to millennials and Gen Z, that are far more racially diverse, higher percentage immigrant, higher percentage that are secular. And demographics are not destiny, but they oftentimes have a huge influence on political values. And what we're seeing right now in American politics is a shift. As the greatest generation silence, and to some extent, the baby boomers are exiting the political system, being replaced by Gen Xers, actually more millennials and Gen Zs, who are far more liberal and more numerous. And what that is suggesting is an enormous shift in American politics. This election is really all about a generational shift in American politics. 4 years ago was the first election in 30 years where the baby boomers were not the largest generational voting bloc.
It's now this block here.
It's this block here, which is somewhere around 40% of the population. They are more liberal on a whole variety of issues, but they're also a little bit more, let us say, less reliable at the polls for a variety of reasons, which is always true for younger people. So what this race is coming down to, we know it's the 7 swing states approximately. Within those 7 swing states, it's going to come down to what young people do. And Harris versus Trump in the last few weeks have been pitching different ways. For Harris, she's pitching to females under the age of 30. Trump is pitching to males, white male Caucasians under the age of 30. And depending on which of those groups shows up in what percentages in which swing states,
and how they vote,
and if they do show up to vote, effectively, that's why even though celebrity endorsements don't generally matter, think about this is an election about what? The Taylor Swifties versus the Joe Roganites or something like that in terms of how it's maybe mobilizing.
Well, let's look ahead to the future now. Okay, so how does this play out going forward with the silence, the boomers, the Gen Xers? As they exit now and we have the millennials, are they less likely to define now as either Democrat or Republicans?
Yeah, they tend to lean, again, the females, college educated, more likely to lean Democrat. The males without a college degree, more likely to lean Republican, but not exactly. The way I've been describing this in my classes and to other people is that they view the two parties as two different two different restaurants with two different menus. They like some things on one menu, some things on another. They want to take some things off the menu, some things rearranged. So what we're going to see in the next few years is both the Democratic and Republican parties are facing an existential crisis as the boomers in silence and these folks exit out, replaced by new groups of people. Will the parties remain? Will they change their label? What will they stand for? But this is one of those elections, along with the one 4 years ago, that's redefining along generational lines.
It's going to become a new bellwether then.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good. Randy, Kelsey, back to you for some more vote totals coming in.
That is really interesting stuff. Thank you for that.
I know, it's interesting to look at just the different generations and to remember that Gen Z is out there voting too. You know, our minds, I still feel like I'm young.
I just discovered I'm not a boomer, I'm a Gen Zer.
Well, you're
Gen X.
You can choose.
You
can choose to be a baby boomer.
Born in
or
61,
Gen
you get to
X.
pick? Is that right, Professor?
Gen X, we're pretty
right.
cool.
That's right.
All right. Yeah, that is very interesting. Thank you, guys.
All right, let's take a look at that electoral college map as it's developing throughout the evening right now. Here are the results. They haven't changed in the last, say, 20 minutes or so. Kamala Harris with 72 electoral votes and Donald Trump with 111 right now. Our eyes are watching North Carolina and Georgia. Those results are coming in. We'll watch them very closely. In the meantime, we will be getting results from Minnesota and Wisconsin as those polls close in approximately 8 minutes. Stay with us for your non-stop election coverage.
"99% of people will do it wrong. You can use CC, your personal study assistant, to get answers quickly and accurately. Of course, CC can also be used as your assistant in various subjects, whether it is liberal arts or science.
race for president, Pennsylvania, which is a really important race tonight. Right now, Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump 67 to 32%, 13% of the votes tabulated.
So a long way to still go in Pennsylvania. Let's take a look at Michigan, and just a small percentage of the vote counted right now. But with that small number, you have Kamala Harris leading with 55% of the vote.
In Florida, a projected winner. This one's over, 56 to 43. Donald Trump, the winner in Florida with those 30 electoral votes.
And voters casting ballots in Minnesota for weeks now. Hundreds of thousands making their voices heard this election cycle. The Secretary of State releasing numbers this afternoon. More than 1.2 million absentee and mail-in ballots were accepted in Minnesota. Voting started here on September 20th. Voting was really at an all-time high in modern elections in 2020. And the United States could be poised to break that 66% this election year.
All right, polls in Minnesota set to close in 3.5 minutes, along with some other key battleground states. That includes Wisconsin, which is a very important race tonight, Arizona as well, Colorado. We'll bring you those results as soon as they become available as well.
And we will have more team coverage throughout the evening with the latest on local and national races.
Here is that electoral college map that we will be giving you throughout the night. It is a very important part of our process tonight as both candidates make their way, or try to make their way, to 270 electoral votes. Thanks for joining us here on Fox 9 Plus for our 2024 election coverage. We're going to continue bringing you election results as they come into the newsroom.
Again, the polls are closing in just minutes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Turn over to Fox 9 as we're live with all of those results. No other.
I'm staying in the race.
A change of heart and a change of direction.
I decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
As Kamala Harris steps in
I accept your nomination.
and puts Minnesota on the ticket.
I couldn't be prouder to be on this ticket.
An attempt on Donald Trump's life.
If I had not moved my head at that very last instant, I would not be here tonight.
And now a divided nation makes its choice for president. Live and local election night coverage starts right now.
And welcome to Fox 9's Election Night coverage. We are live and local for the next several hours. It is just after 8 o'clock. That means polls have closed here in Minnesota, as well as the key battleground state of Wisconsin next door. And we are hopeful some local results will be coming in soon.
We have reporters stationed across the state tonight. Our team is covering not only the presidential race, but our state's Senate race and all 8 House seats. We are at both party headquarters. Republicans gathering in Bloomington and Democrats in St. Paul. And our Tim Blotz is with political analyst David Schultz. They will be watching the balance of power in the Minnesota legislature.
Welcome all. I'm Randy Meyer along with Kelsey Carlson. We are also joined by our political analyst Catherine Pearson tonight as well.
Catherine is a political science professor with the University of Minnesota. So much to cover, of course, and the presidential race is the big race tonight, deciding the 47th president of the U.S. So let's start there.
Let's look at that electoral college map, and Catherine, I'm going to have you weigh in as we look at it as well. Some of these results, as you can imagine, have been coming in the last couple hours as the polls closed on the East Coast much sooner than ours. And we are sort of breathlessly waiting North Carolina and Georgia because those are the first two battleground swing states.
That's right. There are 7 swing states that we're watching tonight. They will determine the Electoral College victor and the next president, and none of those states, not surprisingly, have been called yet. And Georgia and North Carolina were the first to close.
All right, let's take a look at the popular vote, just the vote that has been counted so far. And we do have a long way to go, but so far the popular vote showing Donald Trump leading with 53%.
All right, so just as we noted, polls closing here in Minnesota moments ago. So as you would expect, no results of significant note here in Minnesota just yet. But I want to show you this with our 10 electoral votes. This is what you'll see throughout the night here in Minnesota as we count those. We're pretty confident some numbers should start to filter in over the next 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, as a refresher, Donald Trump lost here in 2020 to Joe Biden by 7 percentage points.
And we are also keeping a close eye on our neighbors to the east. Wisconsin is a key swing state. Both campaigns have spent a massive amount of time in Wisconsin. Biden winning that state by a slim margin in 2020 after Donald Trump won the state in 2016. So, Catherine, we want to go to you for a quick reaction about what's happening across the country. We do have some results on the East Coast, and at 8 o'clock Central Time, a number of states polls closing, and so we'll start to see more numbers coming in.
Right. Well, again, what we've seen so far tonight is not really surprising, with the possible exception of the size of Florida's margin. Florida, that race was called with a 13-point advantage for the former President Trump, and so that's a pretty big margin. We know Florida is not a swing state. You know, it's been a long time since 2020 when Bush v. Gore was decided, and Florida decided the Electoral College vote for president. Florida hasn't been a swing state for a while, but that 13-point margin is pretty big, and Rick Scott, the Republican incumbent, won his Senate race handily.
Some things to watch for tonight, Catherine, as we navigate through these waters. The most important thing to pop up next would be what?
North Carolina and Georgia. You know, absolutely, we're watching those two East Coast swing states to see, what the results will be and when it will be called.
All right. Okay, sit tight. We have more to talk with you about in just a minute, but we want to look at some of the key Minnesota races that we're watching, starting with our U.S. Senate race.
Let's take a look at what we have right now. This is, again, a look at what we will be watching throughout the night. Amy Klobuchar, the incumbent, seeking her 4th term in the U.S. Senate against Royce White, the Republican. He is... At this point, he's an interesting candidate, and much has been said about him. Amy Klobuchar, she's a tough one to beat. In past races, she wins by 60-some% of the vote to most of her challengers, maybe in the 30-40%.
All U.S. House seats, all 8 of them in the state of Minnesota, are up for election this cycle. And let's start with the 1st Congressional District, southern Minnesota. This is Brad Finstad. He's the Republican incumbent facing Rachel Bowman. And right now we're still waiting for numbers to come in, but we're just going to go through these races and show you what the stage looks like.
CD2, Angie Craig, the incumbent Democrat against Joe Tayrab, the Republican. Again, this is what you'll see pop up tonight. No results yet.
Let's look at the 3rd Congressional District. This is the West Metro. You've got Kelly Morrison, the Democratic candidate here, facing Republican Tad Jude. This was an open seat that had been Dean Phillips' seat.
District 4, Betty McCollum, the Democrat, longtime incumbent Democrat, versus Mar-Laure Zhang, the Republican. This is what we'll watch tonight.
The 5th Congressional District, this is a pretty reliable blue seat. This is incumbent Ilhan Omar's seat. She's the Democratic candidate facing Dalia Al-Akidi.
In District 6, Tom Emmer, the Republican, he's the incumbent against Jeannie Hendricks. This is a race that leans toward Tom Emmer. We will watch as the night progresses.
The 7th Congressional District now. This is the western part of Minnesota. This is Michelle Fischbach's seat. She's the Republican running for re-election facing A.J. Peters.
Head up north to Minnesota District 8, Pete Stauber, the Republican, versus Jennifer Schultz. Stauber is the incumbent. This race is not expected to be terribly tight, but we will watch it.
And let's look at Wisconsin. The 3rd District there, you have Derek Van Orden, the Republican, facing Rebecca Cook, the Democratic Democratic candidate, and we are still waiting for some numbers to report in. Of course, the poll's just closing at 8 o'clock in Wisconsin as well.
All right, let's go to DFL headquarters tonight. We'll have our reporters all around the city tonight in both Republican and DFL headquarters. Let's start with Rob Olson. He is at the DFL tonight. Rob, this is very early in the night. This is where everybody's pretty quiet, not a lot happening, but give us a sense for what's going on there.
That's exactly what's going on. Not a lot happening so far. This officially starting now in the 8 o'clock hour. We've seen more people kind of trickle in, not into the ballroom yet, but there's more people out in the lobby area. But of course, over the next hour or so, you're going to start to see this fill up. And of course, in the next couple hours, it will likely be very, very crowded in here. Now, as you mentioned, 4 years ago, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by about 7 points in Minnesota in the presidential race. 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton won over Donald Trump by just 1.4%. So it was thought that, knowing that year was a competitive year, it was thought that Minnesota could become another swing state. It's a very much a purple state, a battleground state, but after the election 4 years ago, not seen as much that way anymore. And certainly the polling this year in Minnesota has shown that that trend will kind of continue. The last polling here showed Kamala Harris with about a 5 percentage point advantage over Donald Trump, but that had weakened. In August, it was nearly twice that in the polls. So it certainly tightened up, but still not within a margin of error. And the DFL party here tonight tells me they still very much expect, very optimistic that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will win Minnesota. But again, a wait and see proposition, but that certainly looks more likely than not. Now, the interesting part about this is if that does happen, then Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan becomes governor, and the Senate President, Bobby Joe Champion, becomes Lieutenant Governor. Now, there is a election tonight for a single seat in the Minnesota State Senate. And so there could be another one here, too, depending on what happens tonight. Certainly, that balance of power equation could continue on, depending on the way that things go for the rest of the evening. But again, we do expect this to start getting much, much busier in here. We do expect that Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and Senate President Champion will be here. We do expect Speaker Hortman to be here as well tonight. And certainly, Amy Klobuchar is fully expected to come here where she will address supporters once her race is called. It is possible Angie Craig may come in here as well after she's done with her own event for this election night. So a lot still to come here tonight, and you can kind of feel the energy now starting to kind of bring up just a little bit here as this party gets underway. For now, we're going to head over there to my colleague Courtney Godfrey, who is at the GOP election night headquarters over in Bloomington, where that party sounds like it's getting a little bit louder too. Courtney.
Good evening, Rob. It's really getting busy here at GOP headquarters in Bloomington, where Republican supporters are feeling enthusiastic as polls closed in Minnesota just minutes ago. The GOP tells me that while political pundits say it would be a long shot for Donald Trump to win this historically blue state, they're still feeling energized as he came close in 2016, and they don't believe that having Governor Walz on the ticket will have any down ballot effects. They're really taking a look at those local elections, especially the legislature. When we're talking about the House and the Senate, the Republicans believe that they have a chance to flip at least one of those. The House tonight, they say they have about half a dozen races across the state that they believe they can flip. They said most of those races were only lost by a few hundred votes, and if they can get independent voters to come out and swing over to the GOP, they believe that they have those races secured and that they can flip the House and have a balance, a mixed balance of power again in the Minnesota legislature. push for Republicans to get out there and vote early. They say in the last 2 years, the Minnesota GOP has really put an emphasis on educating people about the opportunity to early vote, and they hope that that will bring more people to the polls and that that will help them tonight. Again, the room here tonight filling up. We're seeing a lot of Donald Trump supporters. We have seen a couple of the candidates for U.S. Congress show up, a couple of the local state reps showing up. No big names quite yet, but we know that may change as we go throughout the night, and we'll, of course, keep you posted. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Courtney. We want to go back to that electoral college map because more states are being called now. So let's go ahead and show that, put that on the screen. The count there on the left-hand side there, Donald Trump with 195 electoral college votes. Kamala Harris now with 113. The number to get to win the presidency is 270. So you can see the states that have now been called on the map. We are still waiting for those critical swing states on the East Coast to be called.
Yeah. And Catherine, again, Texas is what put Trump up the biggest since last we looked at this map, but also we see Wyoming, the Dakotas, and then Nebraska is kind of a strange breakdown there.
Well, yeah, this might be a good time to talk about
Note
Maine
that for our viewers so they understand what's going on with that.
Well, 48 of the 50 states are winner-take-all for the Electoral College. Whichever candidate wins the popular vote in that state wins all of the state's Electoral College votes. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. 2 of their electoral votes go to the winner of the statewide election, and then the other votes go to the winner of the congressional district. And the congressional district around Omaha is competitive. And so that's why often you have a scenario where Nebraska gives 1 electoral college vote to the Democrat and the remainder to the Republican candidate.
I know it sounded a little bit like a broken record, but no big surprises there.
No big surprises so far. Looking at that map, no big surprises. I think, maybe the magnitude of victories is something to watch, but no big surprises in terms of the results.
Okay.
All right.
Let's take a look at some of the swing states, and then maybe we can talk about just the difficulty of getting results in quickly and why those states may not be called for a while. We're going to start with Minnesota, which is not considered a swing state, but we want to look at the numbers that we're getting in so far. We can't tell you what precincts have reported, but we do have Donald Trump up with 67% of the vote, Kamala Harris 31% of the vote. Just a small percentage of the vote has been counted so far. The polls just closed 13 minutes ago.
And to our neighbors to the east, Wisconsin, also with 10 electoral votes. Right now, Donald Trump up 62% to 36%. But again, these are very rough numbers, very early numbers. Keep that in mind.
Michigan, a true swing state, 15 electoral college votes. Biden did take this state at one point, and Michigan right now is too close to call, but the number of 10% of the votes have been counted. Kamala Harris ahead, 53% of the vote. Donald Trump, 45% of the vote.
The significance of this next swing state cannot be overstated. 19 electoral votes in Pennsylvania. This is the one that everybody's talking about. 19% of the votes counted so far. This becomes really important in Pennsylvania when cities like Philadelphia and other cities start to report in. So again, very early numbers.
Okay, let's take a look at North Carolina now. 16 electoral votes, and only 29% of the votes have been counted. They they've traditionally tried to vote pretty quick or get their vote counted pretty quickly. Right now, Donald Trump leading with 52% of the vote. Kamala Harris with 47% of the vote. We'll wait and see if the numbers are coming from the metropolitan areas or the rural areas in that state.
Take a look at Georgia, neighboring Georgia there. 16 electoral votes in Georgia. This one is moving toward Donald Trump with 68% of the votes estimated to have been tabulated at this point. Right now, he has a 6-point lead in the state of Georgia.
All right, in Arizona, where the polls have not closed yet, 11 electoral votes, and they do, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, they accept absentee ballots that are postmarked by Election Day. Is that right?
Right. Okay. So Arizona is a state that Arizona, Nevada, we can expect the counting to go on for a while.
So it could be very slow. And it was so close in 2020, 10,000 votes separated the two candidates.
Let's, as long as you mentioned Nevada, let's take a look at Nevada right now. 6 electoral votes, but still, it's considered a swing state, even with the low number of electoral votes. Why is that? It's six. You'd think that they could make that up somewhere else, but it becomes so important when you deal with Wisconsin and Minnesota with their 10s. So you need to grab something out there.
Right, absolutely. So depending on how the other swing states shape up, if they're very competitive and evenly divided, 6 electoral college votes can make the difference. And Nevada, just like all of these states, is pretty evenly divided in terms of its partisan identification. Nearly equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats.
And Florida has been leaning red for the last few presidential cycles. Those 30 electoral votes were called for Donald Trump maybe about 45 minutes to an hour ago.
And quickly, Texas taken Donald Trump, projected winner there with a 10% lead, 57% voted reported in, but they do think that those key areas have reported in. So Donald Trump, the projected winner in the state of Texas. Let's take a look at the map in general, the bigger picture of all of this right now. And as you can see, it is filling in. Make sure you differentiate between the gray and the blue. Sometimes if you're just glancing, it's hard to see that. But the blue, the real blue, is the Democrat take, which is Kamala Harris. Obviously the red, but the rest, the grays, have been, those are untabulated at this point. So keep in mind as you're looking at this map that that's how that shakes down.
And then we do have another election alert to tell you about the U.S. Senate race in Minnesota. Amy Klobuchar, the longtime senator, she has won. Those numbers are not updated, but the race has been called for Amy Klobuchar. In the past a few election cycles, she has won by 60-some% of the vote. We'll get those numbers updated, but the race has been called in her favor.
Yes, ignore that right there. Just take your word for it.
Right. The graphic did not update. Okay, let's talk about some of the results and maybe even bring in 2020 because these swing states, not a one of them has been called yet, and they were so close in 2020, and it took days.
It took days. We did not know that Biden won until the Saturday after the Tuesday election 4 years ago. And so it is entirely possible that we could have a similar scenario this year. It sort of depends on the states. So Pennsylvania does not start counting its mail-in and absentee ballots until Election Day. And then on top of that, each county has slightly different election rules. And so we could see just the counting process to take a very long time. And then add to that a state that is so very close, they may count every ballot before it's called.
So this race has been called razor thin now for about 2 months. That's been the mantra. Have you seen anything in the margin of victory in the states that have been called so far that would indicate anything other than that?
The Florida margin is big. The result is not surprising, but the margin is big. Now, obviously, Harris did not really campaign in Florida because it's not a swing state. But that is interesting, and it does make me wonder about Georgia and North Carolina. But it's, those are two much more competitive states.
I think we're going to bring Florida up just to remind people of where we sit with that 30 electoral votes. That's a big number. If you're grabbing electoral votes, that's why it is important. But as Catherine notes, it really wasn't considered a swing state.
Nope.
They expected it to go to Donald Trump. But the margin is notable at 13%.
Yeah. Exit polling. Have you been able to get any information about exit polling today? Just the demographics, who is out voting, what they were saying at the polls today?
Not in terms of the actual exit polls. I mean, some, places in Pennsylvania were reporting very long lines, for example, especially on some college campuses. But again, it's sort of all anecdotal pieces here and there, and we don't have that systematic evidence from the full set of exit polls.
All right, it's about 20 minutes after 8. Minnesota and Wisconsin, we are getting some numbers trickling in. Let's bring up Minnesota first, our home state here. Donald Trump with 67% of the vote to Kamala Harris's 31%. Very early numbers. In fact, Kamala Harris hasn't even broke 1,000 tabulated yet, so we know these are very, very early.
And we want to take a look at Wisconsin. This will be closely watched across the country tonight. About 52,000 votes counted for Donald Trump there, and 33,000 votes counted for Kamala Harris. And again, that is a state where we will be probably watching for a while because they don't start counting the early vote until today. And so this could take some time. They've said to have patience. And I think I did hear a little inkling of some problems, with voting and polling sites today in the Milwaukee area. But I mean, there are always going to be small issues that crop up, but they can slow the process down.
Right.
Yeah.
That slow if polls are open later. Exactly.
For our Wisconsin viewers and Minnesota for that, give us what is is unique about Wisconsin? I mean, it used to be red as could be, and now it's not. And at least from my understanding, the key metropolitan areas of Madison and Milwaukee seem to be the reason.
Well, that's exactly right. So
Why they're not anymore.
right, just like Minnesota, where the urban areas tend to go heavily Democratic, Wisconsin has a similar dynamic where Milwaukee is heavily Democratic, and then the college town of Madison, where the state capital is Democratic as well. So Wisconsin is a swing state. It really depends on turnout across the state, but particularly in these very dense urban areas. In addition to being a swing state at the presidential level, incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin is facing a tough challenge from Eric Hovde. So, that's a race that has generated a lot of excitement as well. And so there were a lot of ads in Wisconsin, both at the presidential level and for the U.S. Senate.
And some of that's bleeding over here, too, because we cover western Wisconsin, so we were seeing a lot of ads. And
that's right, and a competitive House race as well.
Yeah.
So.
Is down ballot voting an issue this year, or is it safe to say in every presidential election that's something that needs to be noted?
Well, it matters in every presidential election, but what we're seeing across the country in recent elections is less split ticket voting than in the past. So sort of party loyalty has gone up, and people are more likely to, vote for the same candidates that they do at the bottom of the ticket that they do at the top of the ticket. And if anything, there may be some fall off where people just don't vote in lower level elections, but there's not as much split ticket voting as there used to be.
All right, let's get back to that presidential election. The Electoral College map, this is the one, as I said before, that we will be watching very closely throughout the night. This is what will determine who goes to the White House. 270 is what it takes to get there. The latest count right now is Donald Trump with 195 and Kamala Harris with 113. But as Catherine notes, if you look to the East Coast there, North Carolina with 16, Georgia with 16. Those are the two that we're watching very closely. Georgia likely to come in first in that race.
So let's talk about the path to the presidency real quick, Catherine. The swing states haven't been called, but polling shows, even though they're very tight races, that they might lean one way or the other. So as you look at the 195 and 113, what are you seeing in terms of like a path to the presidency for each of the candidates?
Well, yeah, of course, each of the candidates would really like to win Pennsylvania. For Harris, if she were to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that would get her to exactly 270. Now, there are other routes to 270 as well for Harris, which do not include Pennsylvania, but that would be really key. Trump can take the Sun Belt states plus one of the upper Midwest states.
And there is Pennsylvania right there. You mentioned how important they are with those 19 electoral votes. 22% of the votes estimated to have been tabulated at this point tonight. Again, very early on in Pennsylvania. They've been warning us all week long that it might take days, if not longer. But right now, Kamala Harris with 58%, Donald Trump with 42%.
Take a look at some of those swing states, some of the key swing states in the numbers that we have so far. Let's take a look at Georgia here. For instance, 70% of the vote now counted, and that's the number that they told us voted early. 70% of eligible voters they had predicted voted in the early voting process. Donald Trump leading with 53% of the vote so far.
Take a look at North Carolina again, that key swing state, North Carolina. 39% of the votes estimated to have been tabulated right now. Donald Trump winning with 50% to Kamala Harris's 48%.
And let's take a look at Michigan. 11% of the votes counted, still a very low number. Right now, Kamala Harris is leading with 54% of the vote. Biden did take the state in 2020.
All right, we take a look at these things and then we sort of dig into them a little bit. The presidential race is the one that all eyes are on. There are important things in Minnesota, and we will get to those as more results come in. But Tim Blotz and David has been with Tim tonight already, so they are kind of digging into some of these things. The presidential race is the one that you guys are going to take a look at now, and how Minnesota kind of breaks down maybe county by county in that race.
Exactly. We're finally starting to get into some granular numbers. I mean, finally, it's 24 after 8, right? Some of these numbers are coming in kind of fast, but still at a low amount. I mean, we're still talking statewide at under 1% of the vote coming in, so keep that in mind. But we do have a couple of counties here, David.
That's right.
Okay, first one is Douglas County. Just about 3%. So far, Donald Trump up 67% in that early voting. And then we also have, David, Douglas County, 67%. Not a surprise, right?
No, we're going to look at, I want to remind people that at the end of the night, 87 counties in Minnesota, Democrats, with the exception of Klobuchar, win about 12 counties, but they win generally the 12 most populous counties in the state, which is mostly going to be right around through here and then up in St. Louis County. And so what we will
the rest, you're going to see red.
It's all going to be red. It's going to look just like America. America is going to be mostly red if you're looking at the county level, but a few blue counties. But yes, we're looking at this point. Still remember, hardly any results in. Look at, was it 0.6% in Ramsey County? Again, no surprises at this point in terms of what we're looking at.
So less than 1% so far in Ramsey County, but this is just kind of a snapshot of the vote total that's coming in so far. We'll get more throughout the night, but I want to reemphasize what David says. A lot of the voting power in Minnesota is in the metropolitan area because that's where the population density is.
Yeah, about 55-56% of the voting population, again, is right through here. Oops, right through here.
And the rest of the state will pop up red throughout the night. And we'll be here to show it to you as those vote totals come in, guys.
All right, Tim, thank you so much. Let's take a look at the state of Texas. Now, this is, we showed you the electoral map on that, and then that did go to Donald Trump, but this is a very closely watched Senate race, U.S. Senate race in Texas. And this was supposed to have been a very tight race. It actually ends up pretty tight, 60% voting or reporting in right now. Ted Cruz, the incumbent Republican with 52%, the declared winner in the state of Texas. That was one that was being watched very closely as a possible flip for the Democrats in the U.S. Senate, but doesn't seem like it's going to happen that way.
All right, we want to go out to Karen Scullett, who is at GOP headquarters, the Radisson Blu at Mall of America tonight, to see what the party looks like now. It sounds much louder than the last time we checked in with you, Karen.
Yeah, you know what? The bar's open. The excitement's flowing. It's been a party here since about 7 o'clock. Room pretty packed overall, and a lot of eyes obviously glued on the big screen TVs behind me. Sometimes they're cheering big when Trump comes up, and it looks like he's, way ahead. And then everybody's like, oh, wait, only 1%. So, kind of some cheers, and then, oh, wait, we got some cheers going for something right now. I guess it's the Ted Cruz race that they're watching right now. But definitely some big energy here, a lot of excitement. A lot of fun outfits, actually, and some MAGA hats, of course. But earlier tonight, I was speaking to the GOP chair, David Hahn. He said, we've worked really hard to get Republicans who are kind of disengaged in past elections to get out and vote, to vote early. And he says he believes that has worked, that the Republican voters really turned out early, but also they're known for turning out on Election Day. So big hopes around here, not only for some of the national races, obviously former President Trump and Kamala Harris race, but some of the local and the state races as well. They're watching that House very closely, the State House very closely, believing they can flip it Republican. They only need about 4 seats. He says 6 to 8 seats are in play. So a lot of hope and a lot of energy in that race, or those races as well. Joe Tayrab was here earlier tonight. He, of course, running against Angie Craig. He was excited, feeling hopeful. So still very early in the night. Everybody watching those screens, watching those votes roll in. But so much time is left to really see how this whole thing turns out. But again, a lot of positive energy here at GOP headquarters. We'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Karen. Thank you so much.
We want to talk about the U.S. Senate now. 34 seats up for election. The Democrats had a 51-49 majority. We want to go back to those Ted Cruz results with Catherine now.
Right. So we already knew that West Virginia has flipped, so that makes it 50-50 if Democrats hang on to the other seats that are up for re-election. Montana, John Tester is not likely to hold on as a Democrat, and so Democrats were really hoping that maybe Florida or maybe Texas, the Republican incumbents could be defeated. We didn't see that with Rick Scott in Florida, and now we didn't see that with Ted Cruz in Texas. So even if all of the other Democratic incumbents win their competitive races, it's virtually impossible for Democrats to hold on to control the Senate.
So now we watch the House.
Right.
And that one is still very much in play.
Very much in play. Republicans have a 4-seat majority.
Okay, thanks,
All right,
Catherine.
let's take a look at some of those key swing states. Minnesota, we're lumping into key swing state only because it's our state, and we want to make sure we stay on top of it, and we want to see the numbers. But again, very few votes tabulated, 1%. Donald Trump with 57% of the vote. Kamala Harris with 41%.
Let's take a look at Wisconsin now. About half an hour after the polls closed there, 10 electoral votes. Donald Trump leading with 53% of the small percentage, 8% of the vote that's counted so far.
In Michigan, they have 15 electoral votes. Kamala Harris, 54%, with a 10% lead over Donald Trump right now, 12% of the votes tabulated.
And Pennsylvania, where all eyes have been on this state this entire campaign cycle, 19 electoral votes, 26% of the vote counted so far. Kamala Harris leading with 55% of the votes that have been counted.
In North Carolina, this is tightening a little bit. It's about a 4-point difference right now with 45% of the votes tabulated. Donald Trump in the lead there.
Now let's take a look at Georgia now. They were going to try to get the vote out a little bit faster than in 2020. 71% of the vote has been counted, which means they were able to get the early voting numbers in there. And right now, Donald Trump is leading in Georgia.
In Arizona, 11 electoral votes. Of course, they're further to the west. No results for the state of Arizona as of right now. Trump has been trending higher in Arizona than Kamala Harris.
In Nevada, the polls close in a half an hour, and they have 6 electoral votes. So we don't have any numbers up just yet, but we just want to give you an idea of the swing states that we are watching, and Biden did carry the state in 2020.
Florida called about an hour ago. Seems unusual, but it did very quickly. Donald Trump winning that state 56 to 43%. This is the 13-point margin that Catherine mentioned earlier, which is significant to note as we move throughout the night.
Another big state that was called early, Texas, for Donald Trump. He beats Kamala Harris in Texas with 55% of the vote tonight.
All right, let's keep looking at this electoral map, and you may feel like we're beating this up, but it's the most important thing in the presidential race tonight is this map. Right now, Donald Trump leading with 195 electoral votes. Kamala Harris just picked up New Hampshire, bumping her up to 117. This is the one to watch tonight. We're expecting the next ones to come in would be Georgia, I'm guessing, because they have been very adamant that they're going to get this thing done right this year.
Yeah, and Catherine, if you feel like 2 swing states come in, are you going to have an indication of maybe where this election is going to go, or do we need to wait for all of them?
Well, we really need to wait for all of them because Georgia and North Carolina are, of course, critically important. But, Harris could win without them, as could Trump. And so they're critically important, but it also depends on, of course, the combination of the remaining 5 swing states as well.
All right, thank you. Let's take a look at Minnesota's congressional races, and we'll also key in on Wisconsin's CD3 as well. But let's start with Minnesota District 1, Brad Finstad, the Republican, versus Rachel Bowman, the Democrat. No results in yet on this one, but there are some results, and we're just going to rip through these so you know what you're going to be looking at tonight.
The 2nd congressional district expected to be the most competitive congressional district in Minnesota. They're watching this one nationally. This is Angie Craig's seat. She's the Democratic candidate facing Joe Tayrab, and she's looking for a 4th term with this race.
District 3, this is an open seat. Kelly Morrison taking on Tad Jude. Kelly Morrison was a Minnesota senator. She dumped out of that, and that opened up that Senate seat that's now being, we're going to watch that very close tonight because that also could tip power in the State House as well.
Let's look at the 4th congressional district. This is the eastern side of the metro. This is Betty McCollum's seat. She's the incumbent, the Democrat in this race. She's a longtime House member. She's facing Marlore Zhang, the Republican, and that's a seat that's been reliably blue.
Ilhan Omar, her her Republican challenger, Dalia Al-Akidi in District 5. This one, most who watch this race do not consider it in jeopardy at all for Ilhan Omar. She hopes to go back to Congress.
And the 6th Congressional District, this is a district that hooks into the West Metro a little bit, North Metro, and then St. Cloud. This is Tom Emmer's seat, the Republican incumbent facing Jeannie Hendricks.
Minnesota District 7, Michelle Fischbach, the incumbent Republican. A.J. Peters, the Democratic challenger right now. We do have some results, again, very early, 1% votes counted, 73 to 27%. That is where it stands very early in this race.
And let's go up north to the 8th Congressional District. Pete Stauber, the Republican incumbent, facing Jen Schultz.
All right, in the U.S. House in Wisconsin, District 3, Derek Van Orden, the Republican, versus Rebecca Cook. This is a race that does have some numbers in, with 6% reporting in Wisconsin. Derek Van Orden winning that one by approximately 15 percentage points right now.
All right, and let's talk with Catherine again about the U.S. House races. The Republicans have the majority there right now. What are we seeing across the country? We know that the 2nd Congressional District in Minnesota is always competitive.
Right.
That is Angie Craig's seat.
Right. So Republicans control the U.S. House by 4 seats. That, of course, makes Minnesota's Tom Emmer. He's currently the Republican majority whip. And so sort of his leadership position is up in the air, even if he wins re-election, which he is certainly predicted to do. So this is up for grabs, that majority party control in the House. There are several competitive seats in New York State. There's several competitive seats in California. There's some in Iowa. Of course, Angie Craig's district here in Minnesota is competitive. There's that Wisconsin district. So there are 24 toss-up races, and then there are about 24 that are competitive, leaning one direction or the other. So most House incumbents will be reelected with no problem. That's true nationally and in Minnesota. But those really competitive races will determine which party controls the majority in the House, and depending on who the president is, whether it's unified or divided party control.
And as you just stated, it seems very unlikely and almost impossible now that the Democrats will hold the Senate.
Right.
So the House becomes very important to Democrats and also very important to Republicans, because if, for example, Donald Trump won the presidency, he would have almost a mandate in that particular case if the House stays as it is.
If the House doesn't change majority parties, though that said, with the 4-point margin, certainly House Republicans have struggled in the last 2 years. It's such a narrow margin, but having the majority is better than not having the majority.
All right.
And if some of these races are in the swing states, it may be a while before they're decided if they're as close as the presidential numbers, too. So
absolutely, and there are 4 Republicans in very competitive races in California, which obviously the polls close later, and it also just takes a long time to count votes in California.
Right. Speaking of swing states, let's take a look. We are getting more results in as the night takes off here, starting with Minnesota with our 10 electoral votes. Donald Trump still leading 57 to 41, but again, only 1% of the estimated votes counted.
10 electoral votes up for grabs in Wisconsin. Right now we have 20% of the votes counted in that state. Kamala Harris with a slight lead at 50.1%.
In Michigan, with their 15 electoral votes, also a swing state. It was a battleground state. Kamala Harris winning that one by 8 percentage points right now. Approximately 12% of the votes have been tabulated in Michigan.
And Pennsylvania, all eyes on Pennsylvania. This is one of those states that basically the state that many analysts were saying whoever wins this might win the presidency. 19 electoral votes, 21% of the vote counted. Kamala Harris leading right now with 51%.
Jump back to Wisconsin for those 10 electoral votes. Kamala Harris with 51%, Donald Trump with 47%. That's a 4-point margin right now. Approximately a fifth of the votes counted in Wisconsin at 8:37. Again, their polls close at 8 o'clock.
Cece, help me with my homework.
The answer is D. X equals 3/8 and X equals 5.
If you're a student, you know how overwhelming school can be. That's where Cece comes in. Whether you need explanations for tough subjects, study plans for important exams, or even motivation to get started, Cece has got your back. It's like having a personal tutor and an assistant rolled into one. Completely free and unlimited. Download CC now and take control of your academic life.
Let's look at Pennsylvania again. 19 electoral votes, 29% of the vote counted now. Again, that is a state that is being closely watched. It will be slow because they start counting the early vote and absentee ballots today. North Carolina, 16 electoral votes, and 49% of the votes counted at this point. Donald Trump with a slight lead at 51%. He did take the state in 2020.
Georgia, with its 16 electoral votes, this is the one we expect to come in with some sort of determination in the next few minutes. 76% of the votes counted in the state of Georgia. Donald Trump ahead by 5 percentage points.
Arizona, 11 electoral votes, and the polls have not closed yet there, but we will continue to watch what happens when the polls close in Arizona. This state was decided by just 10,000 votes in 2020. It took days to call that state. Biden did take the state with 49.4% of the vote.
Same case in Nevada. No polls are still open in Nevada, so no results in Nevada yet. But they do have 6 electoral votes, and this is one that both candidates would like to take.
Florida called early, the 30 electoral votes going to Donald Trump, and he won with quite a lead in Florida, 56% of the vote.
Texas also called earlier with their 40 electoral votes, 55 to 44. 63% of the votes have been tabulated, but again, called for Donald Trump already.
And we're going to add Iowa to this list now. We have some numbers coming in from Iowa. 9% of the vote counted, still very early there. Kamala Harris with a lead of 55% again, but just a small percentage of the vote. But Catherine, real quick, we should ask you, there was this poll that came out just a few days ago that put Harris up in Iowa, and some folks were saying it's just a fluke, but it's worth talking about. What happened?
Right, the Seltzer poll, which is typically a reliable poll, but Iowa has not been considered a swing state, and so there was a lot of surprise about this. And I don't think that most analysts believe that Harris was up in Iowa by 3 points, but it did suggest that the race in Iowa was more competitive than people thought, certainly a state to watch, and then there are 2 competitive U.S. House races in Iowa that, may be more competitive than initially thought as well. So I think we should definitely keep our eye on Iowa.
Okay.
Let's check in with Maury Glover. He's at DFL headquarters at the Intercontinental in St. Paul. Maury Glover, we are early. We're only about 40 minutes into the polls being closed here in Minnesota. What's happening down there?
Well, I can tell you the party has actually gotten started here is what's happening right now. You can see the ballroom here has definitely been filled up in just the last half hour or so. They opened the doors and the public were able to come in. They also kind of started playing some dance music and started having a DJ spin some records in the corner. So folks here excited to kind of come in and see kind of what's going on. A lot of folks have been out in the lobby kind of watching the early election results come in and are watching them very intently and very closely. But obviously the big race is the presidential race, but and hopefully with the Democrats believe with Governor Walz on the presidential ticket that Kamala Harris will indeed win Minnesota. They are also watching several down ballot races in the state Senate, special election to determine the balance of power. And then obviously there are a number of House races that are going on tonight. So the Democrats are optimistic that they'll have a strong showing, but here, party just getting started. Haven't seen any big politicians or dignitaries come through yet, but they will be arriving as the night goes on. But for now, I'll send it back to you.
ये जुल्फ नहीं रातों का बसेरा है, कै दिन में आशिकों का सवेरा है, पीछा ना कर इस तरह से यहाँ मिट जाएगा वरना नामो निशान.
All right, thank you, Maury. We will get back to you in just a little bit. Again, polls have only been closed for 4 minutes. We're waiting for a lot of results to come in, so it's going to be a long night, and so these parties may be a bit quiet before they start to get a little bit louder.
Let's bring our viewers into the top races tonight that we're covering here in Minnesota. Let's start with the popular vote for U.S. President, as it's shaping up right now with 22% of the votes tabulated, 52% going to Donald Trump, 47% going to Kamala Harris.
Now let's take that down to the state level. Let's look at the popular vote count in Minnesota. 2% of the vote counted so far. You can see we're just looking at 6,000 to 9,000 votes counted here for each candidate. Donald Trump is leading in Minnesota. with 58%.
Same story in Wisconsin. Again, 22% tabulated. Kamala Harris with 50%. Donald Trump with 48%. A long way to go in Wisconsin, which is a battleground state.
Let's take a look at U.S. President now and U.S. Senate, rather. Amy Klobuchar, this race has been called for her. It was called early. Those numbers are not correct, and we need to update those numbers, but the race has been called for incumbent Amy Klobuchar.
Minnesota District 2, this is the Angie Craig race, Joe Tayrab race. That race is also considered closer than this. These numbers, 1% tabulated with 0 reporting in on the percentages. So we're just going to break away from that one and come back to it because that doesn't look right.
But her race, her district has been competitive for many years now, and she's looking for a fourth term. Let's look at U.S. House District 3, and this was Dean Phillips' seat. You have Kelly Morrison facing Tad Jude. Kelly Morrison, the Democratic candidate in this race. This is West Metro, and we'll hopefully get some numbers on that race pretty soon.
I mentioned that Minnesota Senate seat that was vacated by Kelly Morrison. District 45, that's Minnetonka, Wayzata, Excelsior, and Mount. It is the only state Senate seat that is open tonight. These are the two candidates for that, Ann Johnson Stewart. And then we've got Kathleen Fauch. These are the two candidates to watch tonight in that.
Your words have stirred something within me.
Senate seat here in Minnesota.
Yeah, the Senate 33-33 right now, so this race decides that balance of power. The lottery amendment, you probably saw this on your ballot. This is where voters will decide whether to renew a proposal that gives some of the state's lottery proceeds to the environment. In 1988, Minnesota voters first approved that constitutional amendment that dedicated a portion of lottery proceeds to the environment. It is back on the ballot because the initiative did have a sunset. Right now, 38% of the vote goes to the yes votes. We're talking about 40% of the lottery funds, which equals about last year's $50 million that goes into the environmental trust. And they do have $1.9 billion in the trust currently. So again, we'll continue to watch just some of those down ballot issues as well.
All right, let's take a look at some of the metro area key House races here. And again, metro area, so it's significant to those of us that live here in the cities. Let's start with District 32B. That's Blaine, Matt Norris, and Alex Moe. Those two are going head-to-head. Norris is the incumbent in that race.
Let's look at the Anoka-Coon Rapids area. Again, we're looking at the very competitive seats, and there are about a dozen of them. So Zach Stevenson, the DFL candidate, facing Josh Jungling, the Republican. DFLer Zach Stevenson, first elected in 2018 and has sponsored high-profile bills to legalize marijuana and sports betting.
Let's take a look at District 35B. That's Coon Rapids and Andover. It's an open seat. Kerry Ray Rauer, the DFLer, and Steve Pape, the Republican. Kerry Ray Rauer is a science teacher, Coon Rapids City Council member as well, and Steve Pape is a Navy veteran and engineer.
Let's look at Lino Lakes, District 36A. Elliot Engen, the Republican, facing Janelle Calhoun, the DFL candidate. GOPer and 26-year-old Engen is running for a second term now. DFL candidate Calhoun first running for office and former executive director of a cancer research nonprofit. Biden did win this district by 3 points in 2020. Engen flipped that to a 3-point win for himself in 2022.
Let's go to the East Metro, Lake Elmo and Afton area with District 41A. This is an open seat. Lucia Robleski, the DFLer, and Wayne Johnson, the Republican. Robleski is a former St. Paul cop, Afton City Council member, and Johnson, a former Cottage Grove City Council member as well.
All right, let's take a look at 41B, that is the Hastings Cottage Grove area. This is an open seat. Tom DePel, the Republican facing Jen Fox, and this is a race that was decided by just 418 votes 2 years ago.
West Metro, Chanhassen-Chaska area, District 48B. Lucy Ream, the DFLer, and Caleb Steffenhagen. Ream is the incumbent there.
Let's look at Shakopee, District 54A. Brad Tabke, the DFL candidate, facing Aaron Paul. DFLer Tabke, former Shakopee mayor, first elected to House in 2018. And the GOP candidate, Aaron Paul, is a Bloomington police officer. This has been a strong blue district, but has flipped between blue and red recently.
All right, let's move now to 57B. That is the Lakeville area in the South Metro. Jeff Whitty, Republican incumbent, and Brian Cohn, DFLer. Whitty's a former Burnsville police officer. He's running for his second term. Cohn is a volunteer leader and small business owner. And so there you have those key Metro House races that will have meaning tonight as we get them.
Cece, help me with my homework.
The answer is D. X equals 3/8 and X equals 5.
If you're a student, you know how overwhelming school can be. That's where Cece comes in. Whether you need explanations for tough subjects, study plans for important exams, or even motivation to get started, Cece has got your back. It's like having a personal tutor and an assistant rolled into one. Completely free and unlimited. Download CC now and take control of your academic life.
Several of those seats that have just been so competitive. A couple hundred votes will decide who the winner is.
That's right. And of all the 134 races, those, along with a few others, will decide whether the DFL or Republicans are in the majority. And, right now it's only a 4-seat margin. So very close and very consequential.
Catherine, do you mind taking a look at that electoral map again? This is the one that really holds most of the meaning as we watch that presidential race. Right now, Donald Trump up 195 to Kamala Harris's 117. Again, 270 is the magic number if you expect to get to the White House. We're still waiting on Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Those are very, very key in this race. Typically speaking, the one that's most key in this race would be Pennsylvania as these things start to shake down the way they have thus far. Is that basically what you're looking at?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm looking at. The key swing states are still either too close to call or, they're still counting depending on the state or both. And so we're really waiting to see what is happening with those 7 states that will determine the outcome.
Let's see if we have some numbers. We're going to go over the swing states here. We will start with Minnesota numbers just because we want to check in on our home state here to see where the count stands. Just 2% of the votes counted, but Donald Trump is leading with 58%.
Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes right there. It is also very close there. This is a battleground state, and you can see why. About a third of the votes have been tabulated. We have no knowledge of whether or not the Madison-Milwaukee is part of this, but right now Donald Trump leading by 1%.
Michigan has 15 electoral votes, and right now there are only 14% of the vote counted. Kamala Harris is leading with the votes that have been counted, 53% to Donald Trump's 46%.
As we mentioned, Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. This one is not expected to come in at an early state tonight, but it's very important. Right now, it's also very close with about a third of the votes tabulated. Kamala Harris winning by 3 percentage points.
And North Carolina now, 52% of the votes counted. Donald Trump is leading with 52% of the vote. He did carry the state in 2020.
Move on to Georgia. Also 16 electoral votes in Georgia. Approximately 80% of the votes have been tabulated. Right now, Donald Trump